Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, what is sexual narcissism? To help answer this question, I'll be using a couple of articles, one from 1999 by Ryabeck and colleagues, and another from 2015 by Casper and colleagues. I'll put the references for these articles in the description for this video. So first I'm going to start with the construct of narcissism, take a look at the two types of narcissism, move to narcissistic personality disorder, and then talk about how this relates to sexual narcissism. So when we look at the construct of narcissism, we see that it's a personality trait, and it tends to be stable over time. Most of the time we think of narcissism as normal and adaptive. It's when the levels become too high, they can become problematic. We tend to see that narcissism is also associated with being low on the agreeableness trait in the five-factor model, so being disagreeable. In general, we think that if somebody has high narcissism, they would have characteristics like being grandiose and arrogant. But there are two types of narcissism. One type is grandiose narcissism, sometimes called overt, and the other type is vulnerable narcissism, sometimes called covert narcissism. With grandiose narcissism, we see characteristics like being dominant, having a sense of entitlement, being extroverted, so high on extraversion in the five-factor model. We also see callousness, a sense of superiority, and a tendency to exploit other individuals, sometimes called being manipulative. On the vulnerable side, we see characteristics like being insecure, fearful, being sad, being introverted. This would be low on extraversion in the five-factor model. Having what's referred to as shame-proneness, so tending to experience shame, being hypersensitive, angry, and aggressive. Now sometimes when we talk about these two types of narcissism, the term narcissistic personality disorder gets mentioned. But narcissistic personality disorder is different than grandiose or vulnerable narcissism. It's more similar to grandiose narcissism, but it's an official diagnosis in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So somebody could be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. They could not be diagnosed with grandiose or vulnerable narcissism. Those are simply constructs measured on a continuum. Now, narcissistic personality disorder is a cluster B personality disorder, so it's in the same cluster as antisocial, borderline, and histrionic personality disorders. And we believe that sexual narcissism has a close relationship to narcissistic personality disorder, and of course to grandiose narcissism in general. So sexual narcissism is a pattern of egocentric sexual interaction. And as I mentioned, it's considered a sexual variant of narcissistic personality disorder. So some of the characteristics we see associated with sexual narcissism would include a preoccupation with sex, placing a lot of importance on sexual activity, having sexual compulsivity, sometimes this is called hypersexuality, having a casual attitude or orientation towards sexual interactions, having a sense of entitlement directly related to sexual activity. So this would be similar, of course, to the sense of entitlement we see with narcissism in general. We also see sexual manipulation. So again, we see a correlate here over to narcissism with the manipulation piece. We see promiscuity, which isn't surprising given the casual orientation towards sexual interactions, and an inflated sense of sexual skill or ability. And this one in particular really seems to stand out in terms of identifying sexual narcissism, if somebody believes that they are better at sex than other individuals. We also see that sexual narcissism is associated with sexual boredom, and not surprisingly, associated with sexual sensation seeking. So if somebody has sexual boredom, it kind of makes sense that they would have this sensation seeking component as well. We also see that it's associated with pornography use, sexual dissatisfaction, and having an increased number of sexual partners. Sexual narcissism is associated with sexual aggression, having a lack of emotional intimacy, and an increased risk for having extramarital affairs. Now, a lot of times in the research studies, we see that sexual narcissism is measured with one specific instrument. This instrument is called the Index of Sexual Narcissism, and it has 25 items on it, so it's a self-report instrument. We see items on this instrument that are related to believing that somebody doesn't get enough sexual praise from their partner, We see items like endorsing that emotional closeness interferes with sexual pleasure. And this is one of those items in particular, I think, that really connects with sexual narcissism. A lot of people believe that emotional closeness and sexual pleasure have some sort of relationship, and of course that they may be independent, but to believe that emotional closeness interferes with sexual pleasure, I think really points to narcissism a lot more strongly than some of the other example items I'm giving here. We also see items designed to capture that sense of having a special sexual skill, like a special style of making love is one of the items, and we see that somebody might be prone to leave a relationship if sex is no longer enjoyable. That's one of the items on this index of sexual narcissism. So looking at these two studies specifically and their results, we see that the 1999 study really tells us a lot of things I already mentioned here in this video. Like it confirmed that individuals who are high on sexual narcissism place a great deal of importance on sex and tend to have an increased number of sexual partners. Now the 2015 study specifically looked at how sexual narcissism was related to internet pornography use. And in terms of the analysis that took place in this study, we see that the data is divided a few different ways. So one way is looking at participants who ever used internet pornography versus those who never used internet pornography. And what we see here with this study is that from the ever used group, these individuals were higher on all measures of narcissism, including sexual narcissism as measured by the index of sexual narcissism. And these results were true for both men and women. So when they looked at men and women separately, we still saw the levels of narcissism higher on all the measures. Another way we see the participants divided up in this study is between those who currently used internet pornography during the study and those who did not currently use internet pornography. And what we saw here is the same results. Those who currently used were higher on all of the measures of narcissism, including sexual narcissism. And just like we saw with the other findings, these findings were true for both men and women. So this study offered an examination of one area related to sexual narcissism, but information about this construct can be useful clinically. We know that if somebody reports internet pornography use, we may want to assess for narcissism, and if we assess somebody as being narcissistic, we may want to ask about their internet pornography use history. We also see that research on sexual narcissism in general is useful. Understanding sexual narcissism gives us insight into some of the potential problems associated with narcissism and some of the risks that partners of individuals who are high in narcissism may be exposed to. Narcissism carries painful consequences for people who have the trait, as well as sometimes people who are in relationships with those individuals. So again, understanding this construct is important and offers us value in terms of clinical usefulness. I hope you found this description of sexual narcissism to be interesting. Thanks for watching.